What does the term followership mean to you? Our guest, Claire Gaul, joined us to delve into what it means to be an effective follower in international schools. Claire had written a blog post for our Learning Hub that really got Audrey and me thinking about how being a follower connects to leadership in international schools, a theme that runs through many of our shows. Claire describes the interactions of followership and leadership as a type of dance. I think this description makes a lot of sense. Claire provides a 360-degree view of her metaphor during our discussion. Our guiding question for this show was, what is followership in our schools, and how does it go hand in hand with leadership? Claire shares her thoughts and wisdom, with the following being a few of her main points. Her impetus for writing the blog post, a definition of followership that includes constructive followership, how to lean into being constructive, the possible personal and professional cost of not having healthy boundaries regarding followership, suggestions to help our listeners gain perspectives on themselves and their interactions with others, and her recent recruiting experience. Check out our show notes to learn more about Claire. You can also go back to episode 51 to listen to our interview with Claire and her husband, Jamel. This episode was recorded on March 15th, 2025. Join us now to explore how we, as international educators, dance with one another for the betterment of our students. And once again, get ready to appreciate the thoughtful and considerate nature of Claire Gaul as she leads us through this discussion.
Hi, Claire. Welcome back to Educators Going Global. Thanks for being here.
Well, thank you for having me, Dave and Audrey. It's really nice to be back on.
Yeah, it's good to see you. So tell us where in the world you are at the moment.
So right now I am in Guangdong in Zhengzhou, China, which is a suburb of Guangzhou.
Okay, fantastic. And have you got a going global story you'd like to share with us today?
Yes, it's not connected to our topic, but it was something I was reflecting on. I'm an avid runner. I just ran a half marathon last month in Hong Kong. And one thing I really enjoy about where I live is where I can run. I live kind of out in the sticks by a lot of people's standards. So I get to run on some old farm roads, and I run through banana groves and lychee forests. And I really love it. And I was thinking about it today, and I was remembering when I worked in Cameroon, we had one of our COVID lockdowns. This was in the spring of 2020. And I was no longer to go out on my daily runs. And we lived in an apartment block at the time with a small outdoor area. And there was kind of a walkway around the perimeter of the building. And it was about 25 meters on each side. So it was like a 100-meter kind of square. And I remember one day just getting so antsy, I couldn't do my runs. And so I said, okay, I'm going to challenge myself. And I made up in my mind a run for myself, and I called it the Hamster Wheel 10K. And I ran 10 kilometers around the perimeter of our apartment building. I did about 100 laps. And when I uploaded my run to Strava, it showed the route. And it was just a bunch of drawn circles around the perimeter of the building. So yeah, reflecting on that, I realized how lucky I am to be able to do what I love here.
Yeah, it sounds like you're in such a beautiful area. And I'm wondering if your fitness app was checking in on you to make sure you were okay, that you were running in circles for such a long amount of time. Who knows? That's the future of AI. They're going to be checking in on us one way or another. So thank you for sharing that. And let me kind of lay where we're going today in our discussion, because we're very excited. I use that word a lot, but I get excited with our guests and their topics. And this is one I'm super excited about. that Claire was very gracious to write a blog post entitled On Followership. And it's going to go up on our Learning Hub very soon. And as I read through it and Audrey read through it, I think it gave us a lot of ideas and said, let's do a whole show on this. It was very thought-provoking and really got me looking back at my career, thinking about my place and my role in my different schools and being a follower and being a leader and kind of in between. So this takes us to our guiding question of what is followership in our schools and how does it go hand in hand with leadership? So let's break that down a little bit. Let's start off with what was your impetus to write this blog post?
So the impetus for me was some events or situations over the past few years, that things I saw with coworkers, saw happening, interactions I had with leadership, and a conversation with my mom, because she taught for her whole career. She taught for over 30 years, so she's a wise person. And a lot of me talking to her is kind of complaining, talking about bosses and leaders. And she mentioned something about collective leadership, about, teachers on the job at school who engage in collective leadership, who communicate with each other, who support each other, who stand up for each other. And I kind of wanted to explore that a little further and develop my own thinking about it. So it was a conversation with her and just some things I saw over the years, the way some of my colleagues were treated. I worked with a colleague who was a good friend she was kind of an outspoken person, very vocal and progressive in her thinking. And she wanted to take more initiative and have a voice in decision making. And when her contract didn't get renewed at this particular school, we felt it was an injustice. And so I experienced or worked with friends who went through things like that. And it just made me really question, how can we work together as a staff, and what can I do in day-to-day teaching, outside the classroom, to just try to make things more fair, I guess, or transparent. So that was the impetus for writing this blog post.
And right away, you're getting into one of the many aspects of what I think we're going to talk about. One could be that potential educator or multiple educators in one school who either have a strong skill set, have a lot of ideation ability, people who have done things at other schools, and they come in, and then there can be the response, if it's a whole school or maybe just the division, where they get the response to say, well, that's nice, Susie, but this is the way we've always done it. Mm-hmm. And we use that acronym TWADI and just kind of stamp down on it. And then there's the aspect of saying, often at the start of the school year, administrative leaders can say, we're all working this together. Our leadership depends on your input, and we're going to have a lot of discussions going back and forth. But then if someone in that follower position maybe pushes and it's taken in an uncomfortable way, it can become a black mark on their career, and they can quickly get kind of a name, a descriptor that isn't fair. So that's one aspect of what I think we're going to talk about today. And we're going to talk about also other aspects of being a follower and being just too passive sometimes. But we'll get into more of that in just a moment.
Well, and I think it's important too to think about part of the reason why this is an issue is that for those of you who haven't been teaching internationally, to understand that by and large, international schools don't have unions. So there isn't that protection for teachers. There's not always a due process. And, you can say the wrong thing in one situation and kind of that's it. Like Claire said, your contract's not renewed. So that's kind of where we're going with this. So yeah, it's finding a way to voice your ideas while, not stepping too far over the line. And it can be really uncomfortable sometimes. So I'm glad we're addressing this issue. So let's get into the post. First, Claire, if you wouldn't mind kind of defining what you're calling followership, while also covering what you describe as constructive followership.
Sure. Yeah. Followership for me, in its most basic concept, it's being a constructive organizational citizen. That's kind of how I break it down in my mind, because a school is a microcosm of a larger society, right? So when we're constructive at work as a follower, it means being engaged. It means being engaged and constructive with your feedback and being very present, right? So it's more than just doing a good job in the classroom. I also found it helpful for me to say what it is not. So being engaged and constructive follower is not complaining constantly, right? It's not being sycophantic. It's not being critical to the point of alienating yourself and not being able to see the big picture. So that's kind of in a nutshell, and it's kind of boiled down terms, what it means to me.
Yeah, sometimes we hear the term solution focused too. So to come into a situation focused on how maybe things could be improved instead of, like you said, just whining and complaining, because that really doesn't help anybody. And, I can kind of imagine, just playing devil's advocate a little bit here. I haven't been an administrator. I have been a head of department. And when people don't like the way you're leading and they just complain about it without offering anything helpful for it, that's really frustrating from that side. So I think that's as well something we're going to talk about here.
Yes.
So thanks for the definition.
No, absolutely. Yeah.
Let me connect to that one also for that colleague who sometimes is just projecting. They're bringing in maybe struggles outside of the school and bringing them into the classroom, or maybe they've had some bad experiences in previous schools and they've just taken on this mantra of complaining and such. And what's popping in my head is how it's not followership, but it's just being good colleagues. How can we be present? I like that term that you use, present with them, but also have critical conversations that we're ready to say, Tom, I'm seeing a pattern here. It seems you're struggling with what's been happening with a couple of these decisions, but let's talk about what happened in that decision. We all gave information. The decision was made. Help me understand, why do you think being critical and complaining about it even further is going to be constructive, to use that term? So that I just add that to the conversation as folks process followership and people who maybe struggle with trying to be constructive and just kind of go down that negative route. All right, moving on a little bit. Let's keep going with the constructive aspect. How do we approach and lean into being constructive? And what are some potential ramifications of this approach to interacting with school leadership? So let's take the first one. Just how do we become more constructive?
Well, I think part of it is you can approach it the way you reflect on your teaching. You can also reflect on the way you approach followership and by asking yourself questions. One thing I think is really important is keeping in mind your particular school's mission and values and asking yourself, okay, am I bringing my best skills and am I contributing, and how am I contributing to the school's mission and values and their vision? And, sometimes you can, I will read the school's strategic plan and be like, okay, where's my niche? Okay, what can I do to help move that along? And then on a day-to-day basis, because I know at work we can feel scattered and pulled in different directions and dealing with the immediacy of teaching our classes. But in little interactions, even if it's just at lunch, like really listening to others' lived experiences, I think is something important. Asking yourself about your core values. And then how you define your own role as a follower, and asking yourself how engaged you are in the school's initiatives. Are you just going along with it because it's in the contract, or are you really into it? And are you really bringing your best self, or your most skillful parts of yourself? And then also asking yourself what your own struggles are and your strengths as being a follower. And then asking yourself how you give and receive feedback. Because I know from myself, I can be quite sensitive. So if someone's kind of sandwiching it in or like doing it in a caring way, I'm much more receptive to feedback. And asking yourself how you communicate with leadership and how you want to communicate with leadership. And also asking yourself how you would handle disagreements and if there's something you can do to improve upon that. So I would say in the beginning, it's asking yourself, allowing yourself to honestly reflect on that. And then engaging colleagues in similar kind of conversations, or just allowing these things to develop naturally.
Boy, howdy, you just rolled off about 7 very tangible strategies about self-reflection and stepping outside of yourself. Instead of being the person that's pointing fingers and putting up a wall between yourself and others, it's more, how am I coming across? What do I need to do? What are preconceived baggage that I bring to this? So I really appreciate starting there. And then as you start working as a follower, you're working with leadership. You hit a couple on how do you interact with leaders. What are some questions one might ask themselves when they start interacting with the leaders to help them gain perspective?
I would say, I guess this kind of applies more when you're new somewhere, because we all do the interview process before we get hired. And I know sometimes you might end up working with people you already know, and that's great. But if it's a new relationship, trying to have open dialogue about the leadership's approach to leading, and maybe getting them to talk first and setting kind of, if it's like a staff meeting kind of situation, setting those kind of essential agreements for working with each other. I think a lot of schools do that anyways, but I've always worked at small schools, so I've been able to have these kind of one-on-one conversations with school leadership. But if you can actually find a way to, have that conversation one-on-one with the school leader, I think it's really helpful, and putting yourself out there so they can see your face and get to know a little bit about who you are.
Yeah, nice. I think it's great to also consider developing a good relationship, like you said, especially when you're new, reaching out and having some just positive social kind of conversations and so on to lay some groundwork of, I'm a reasonable person and I want to just feel out the situation rather than coming in with gunslinging already going on with a chip on your shoulder of this is how we did it in my old school and why is this school, deficient in whatever way. And I think you make a really good point that that's an important time to kind of pave the way to demonstrating that you're a reasonable, thoughtful, present person. I like that. So you have described in your article the relationship between leaders and followers as a type of dance. To you, what does it mean to be an effective follower using that metaphor?
Using that metaphor, what I had in my mind, I was thinking about, I follow this one Instagram influencer. She's a Lebanese woman and she's a dabka dancer. And all of her Instagram posts are her leading dances in Lebanon. And she's amazing. And the drum starts going and she starts to lead this dance. And then everybody falls into step with her. And I just love it. So what I was kind of imagine in my mind is this sort of back and forth and then syncing up and following and leading. I suppose it could also be a tango, but I don't know how to tango.
Well, you also mentioned something in the article about the leader setting the beat and the followers joining in on the beat.
Yes, I think not everybody agrees with me. In fact, this is an ongoing kind of disagreement with my husband. Is I really think school leaders do set the beat, whether it's really out in the open and they're doing it consciously. But I think the energy that school leaders and leadership brings to the school and the environment, I really think it sets the beat. So I've worked with school leaders who spend a lot of time in their office. And on the one hand, we might sit as a staff and be like, this guy's always in his office. We don't feel seen, right? So then we start to wonder, like, do they even know our name? Do they know the kids' names? But then on the other hand, I've also seen the school leadership bouncing around to different classrooms, and then you get staff who are like, oh, they were in my room again today. So different people have different feelings about this, but I do think that school leadership has a responsibility in the tone that they set, the beat that they set.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I appreciate that. And having worked in a few elementary schools where I think the norm is for assistant principals, principals to really be in not just classrooms, but in team meetings in a very organized way. It shows a lot that they're there and they're bringing in their wisdom. I said to one principal at an elementary school who gave a kind of a PD session for the whole staff. And he asked me, he said, Dave, how do I do? And I said, you're great at this. And part of your job is you're the instructional leader for this division. And he kind of hesitated because he had fallen into the role of being like the parent liaison, the problem solver, and he'd forgotten. And I think it gave him a lot of energy. And that kind of brings me to the point of when we come to a school, we build the relationships with our leadership. And just like you're saying, how can we go in and ask questions to better understand what their lives are like? But then we can also get into, are they staying in their comfort zone or are they moving into their stretch zone? And that's touchy territory to bring that up until you build a real relationship. Yet I always struggle bringing anything to administrators because I know how difficult their jobs can be, but I also know sometimes there are choices when it comes to that comfort zone. And for me, I really believe administrators on the first level need to be in those team meetings at each division, whether it's department, middle school, elementary, because decisions can be made right then instead of, oh, I'll go to the next whatever hierarchy of meetings we have every 2 weeks and I'll get an answer then. And then you really want to move forward with that program, but you wait a month. So that's my 2 cents, and I can say it sitting here in the grandstand and I'm not on the playing field. So I can get away with that.
Yeah.
And now we're going to pause for a moment
to share a special message.
Hello, listeners. We are so happy and grateful that you're here with us. And now, for a minute, we're going to get real.
Our mission, as you probably know, is to inform aspiring and existing international educators about the nature of this wonderful lifestyle. For 3 years now, we've worked hard to live up to that mission. We spend hours creating content, liaising with guests, and editing these shows for broadcast. As you know, we love providing this public service, and it helps us tick all of our personal PERMA boxes.
For sure. But here's something a lot of you may not know. We're actually paying out of our own pockets to do this. It costs money to record and host our shows and to run our website. So we're here to ask you a favor.
We are. Would you kindly consider sponsoring us through Patreon? For less than the cost of a cup of coffee per month, you could be helping us break even in terms of these costs. If you feel you're getting value from these shows and from our information hub, and if you can afford it, please go to www.patreon.com/educatorsgoingglobal, and we'll have that link in our show notes to make it easy for you.
We have a couple tiers for your effort to support us. Tier 1 is experience, And there, you're just giving us money to support us. And tier 2 is exploration, the chance to join live Q&As with experts.
You got to love that little bit of punning on the EGG. Thanks once again, honestly, for your interest in traveling, teaching, and connecting with us.
And now, back to our regular programming.
Let's go.
All righty. Now, let's move into a little bit of a different territory. What are some possible personal and professional costs of not having healthy boundaries regarding followership, where we can lean too far to just be complacent and just be totally following, and even when decisions are made that can affect us in a negative way, and then maybe to the other extreme where it's not that we're complaining, but we always are in our top gear. Mm-hmm. We're just pushing when it comes to trying to get things done. Why don't we start off with when we are too complacent and we give in too much and we're not being healthy? Let's start with that.
Well, I think there's some degree of, if you are giving in too much, you run the risk of compromising your kind of own values and principles or certain boundaries. Not if you're necessarily complacent, but if you are always being the one to volunteer, to do something extra, you run the risk of being that one. And maybe other staff are less likely to volunteer for whatever the initiative. Maybe it's just something simple like being a chaperone. But if you're the one always volunteering, then someone else might say, nah, Claire's got it, just as an example. And that can cause a kind of burnout or resentment, because then you start to feel like, oh, I'm always the one doing something. And then when there's complacency, when you just think maybe everybody else will handle it, I think you can run the risk of losing your own voice, and you lose out on giving input, which might it could make someone feel just a little bit left out, I think. Left out of things. I've always worked in really small schools where it's not difficult to be heard if you're willing to speak up. So, that's the kind of environment I'm coming from. And then on the other hand, if you're a person who's overly critical and always speaking up or always finding fault with decisions or how things are running, I think that then, as David mentioned in the beginning, that you can get labeled, right? You can kind of get labeled the complainer or the negative one, and if you're working in a small school like I do, then it just stands out a lot more, I think.
And let me add a little facet on that one, and I'll use Mark Forgeron as an example. Incredible educator, driven human being. And when we were in Saudi, I was the head of counseling in the middle school. And we had switched to a middle school system over a junior high, so we had teams. And we were struggling with some kids who were really strong in music, and we had a phenomenal music program. And the decision was made that they would switch from the blue 7B to the 7R. I can't remember the colors. It's been too long ago.
Gold. Blue and gold.
Okay. Blue and gold. And they would not be, maybe that student might not be in Mark's math class, but would be in the other team's math class. And I always respected his coming in on principle. And his principle was the team dynamic and all that you could get out of it. And he was always fair, and he offered his opinion, and I listened. I took it in, and I would share it with the principal, and we moved forward with that. I always appreciated that. So for someone in that position who's not being critical, not complaining, but saying, here's something we said we believed in, and they're holding true to it. And then when the decision's made, then you go, okay, the decision is made. So I'll throw that in as an example, not a negative at all, but a positive. But you got to be ready for that administrator to go, Mark, you're pushing too hard, or Dave, you're pushing too hard, right?
Yeah. There's such an art to it.
There's such an art.
Also, it makes you more appreciate administrators who are open to hearing that.
Mm-hmm.
There are administrators who are so defensive for whatever reason that anything you bring to them feels like a personal attack on their decisions or their choices or what have you. And I think it's important what you're saying, Dave, that if your bottom line is, A, this is what we've identified as what's important to us as a school. So, like Claire said, falling
Mm-hmm.
back on the mission and vision and values. And B, is this what's best for kids? Because that is practically impossible for anyone to argue against. And also, one thing I've kind of learned in terms of win-win negotiation is you've got to find common ground. And the common ground should always be what's best for kids. If you're looking at it that way, it's like, Mrs. Administrator, Mr. Administrator, you and I are on the same team. We collectively have an issue here because this may not be what's best for kids. So then now we're working together to solve a problem that wasn't created by you, wasn't created by me. It's something that we can work on together. I think that might be part of what makes it a more constructive kind of approach. And then also the whole solution focused idea around, well, what if we tried such and such? So I think there's a real art to it. So I appreciate what you said there, David.
Yes, David.
Yeah. Did anything else you want to say, Claire, about boundary setting?
I wanted to just reiterate and just kind of echo you talking about how it's such an art to push back or state what you believe. It is an art, which is why I've spent so much time thinking about it, because by nature, I'm very just outspoken, very direct, and that can really, I think, make a person come across as too pushy or negative. So I appreciate that you guys know how to do that and understand that there are respectful and non-threatening ways to say, look, this is this is best for the children, or, this is what I believe will work.
Mm-hmm. And starting with a basis of empathy, I think, is also really important.
Huge. Seeking to understand where are they coming from. And I'm hearing so much of that from the two of you. So let's take a quick case study. And this isn't something we talked about, but Claire, without disclosing too much here, both you and I have been in jobs in the past, where we were told we were going to have certain responsibilities or certain job titles. And that didn't happen. And so the reason I'm bringing this up is that can happen to a certain degree with international schools, with enrollment, changes in staffing and things like that. So I want to do a quick case study that you've been hired, you come to the new school and they say you're going to have a leadership position besides teaching fourth grade. You're going to do XYZ. You get there a few weeks in, nope, that just isn't going to happen. We're not going to do it. So this is where, again, sitting in the grandstands, and if I could go back and talk to myself in the past, I would have said, David, you're a Southern gentleman. You can't just say, okay. You need to be able to go in and have that critical conversation where you seek to understand, you get all that information, but you also stand up for yourself. And just as Audrey said, you try to find a win-win, because I'm looking back in my situation where I should have said, can we do a small version of this role? Just pilot it and see what happens. That might have been fruitful. So I just wanted to bring that up to our listeners. And it also, we'll talk about recruiting in just a minute, but the same thing can come with recruiting to really get clarity on what you're going to do. What are the expectations so that when you arrive, if anything changes, hopefully you have it in writing. Mm-hmm. And you're going to be a good follower, but you're going to be good to yourself and be ready to communicate what your needs are and what the promises were. So I throw that out to the two of you.
Yeah, I think that hindsight's always 20/20, right? Like when you can look back, like, I should have done that. In my experience, what I experienced more of was having expectations. Things are as they should be in the contracts. And then maybe what was promised in the contract was not necessarily with the job description so much, but maybe in outside of school, like the housing situation was not as promised. And then in my experience, it kind of became like a negotiation. And at that point, when we had a problem with our housing at one job, and I was so incensed that I didn't know how to respond. And when I tried to speak up for myself, I was kind of shut down and was told, well, this is what it is. And if you want to leave, then you're going to have a fine for breaking contract. And at that point, I deferred to my husband because he's got a corporate background and knows how to negotiate and kind of be really upfront without showing his anger. And eventually, we got this situation sorted out, but it took months. And at that point, I just asked myself, like, why was I afraid to speak up? And how come in the way I expressed myself, I was shut down? So that's one of these things that as I've really reflected on, and it's led to many more questions, like, is it because I'm a woman and I'm seen this way? And so, yeah, I think that you have to approach when things maybe aren't presented the way they're originally promised. You have to decide how you want to approach it and what you're willing to put up with.
Can be such a challenge. So I'm glad to hear that you did get it worked out eventually. And it's unfortunate when things like that happen. They probably have their reasons, and yet you have your rights as well based on what you were told. And it's just difficult all around, honestly. So glad to hear you were able to work through it, and good for Jamel for finding a way. And I do hope it wasn't because you're a woman. That is something that certainly you hear a lot about. And, we like to hope that that's not part of it, but it's hard to know, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah. Okay, so let's flip it to a slightly more positive outlook, talking about solution focused.
Yes.
What suggestions do you have to help our listeners gain perspective on themselves and their interactions with fellow teachers, team members, administrators, and so on?
So earlier I mentioned reflecting, right? So really what I've learned is about building habits within your own mindset, about how you can and what you should do, or for me, how I should present myself to make really positive contributions to school culture. And Audrey, you mentioned empathy, and also thinking about what school leadership deals with on a daily basis, and how school leadership is not just about making sure teaching and learning is happening, keeping in mind that leadership has a whole nother dimension of stakeholders that they are beholden to and serve. So one thing that really helps me in my approach is keeping the big picture in perspective and keeping a kind of community-focused approach to talking and making plans and collaborating with leadership and thinking about the big picture and how decisions and conversations and what we choose to bring up, how it's going to impact students.
Yeah, and bringing it back to that focal point, as Audrey was saying, makes it difficult to kind of argue against that. What is best for students? But I am going to say what's best for teachers as well. We are of the giving profession, yet many times teachers are not as healthy as they should be.
Mm-hmm.
And the more that we can help teachers with their personal wellness and their professional wellness, and I'm just going to say we're going to have the blog post up very soon, and folks can take a read. And to me, the big takeaway here is just stopping, thinking a bit, going through, like you had 7 points in a row to contemplate, to think about yourself and your followership, but also that for so many educators, there are leadership aspects in their jobs, whether they become a middle level leader or they want to be an administrator or run after school programs. We often step into that role as well. All right, now totally switching gears. You and Jamel and your children are heading off to India, and we were just wanted to do a quick, how was the recruiting process this year? Maybe how was it a bit different? How was the same compared to previous efforts?
So for us this year, I was really prepared to I over prepared. I had done all this research and had lists and I really went into it thinking like, this is going to be so hard. And we applied to 12 schools. Jamel had 2 interviews on his own for DP design. And then we had 2 interviews as a couple. And we had an offer by October. So we got snatched up quickly. And it was so much quicker and less stressful than the last time. So I was really, really grateful for that. I was grateful to have had an offer so early. And the only misgiving about that was, oh, this is a really cool school. I've been interested in the school for a while. But what if something better comes along down the road? So I think everyone goes through that when they're recruiting.
Buyer's remorse.
Yeah, but it was good. And with ChatGPT, I was kind of practicing generating possible questions I might get asked and like how would I answer these? Like I really put my heart into it because you might have noticed I tend to talk a lot when I'm nervous. So I wanted to do well in the interviews and we kind of found a hack for that. We just had Jamel do the interview first before they interviewed me so I could hear the questions from the other room so I was ready when it was my turn to interview.
Good hack.
And the one thing I would tell people who are thinking about maybe looking for a new job or getting into international teaching, the one thing that was really different was we tried I can't remember what it's called, the one-way interview, the video interview. It's like a screener and you record your answers and then their AI software screens it. That is really something. And everybody hates it, but for one job we applied to, we got a set amount of time to answer each question, but you get to re-record as many times as you need to. So that was new, but I think we did pretty well. So like I said, if you're planning to recruit, that is something that's getting really popular is the one-way interviews that get screened by AI software.
Audrey, you're nodding your head. You've heard of this?
Yeah, Mark went through that.
Oh my gosh. All right. And the other aspect of the technology, that's very creative to go through AI and think of what possible questions could be. So there are a couple of very powerful tips. So maybe the last little section would be when we interviewed the two of you before and your children, clearly this was a family effort and that you engaged your children. And we talked about the importance of, especially as one's children move into the middle school or high school, that you've got to find the right fit. So what was your take on that with your children?
Well, that was interesting because we were kind of screening schools and looking at what kind of learning support they offer. Because one of my children, she was recently diagnosed being on the autism spectrum and with mild ADHD. So this diagnosis came through right as we started recruiting. So it kind of, even though we were a little bit surprised, we're like, okay, this is going to impact the way we look for schools. So that was one of the criteria, was what kind of learning support they could offer my daughter. And the other thing we looked at, because our children are going to be in year 6, was how diverse is the student body and what kind of activities do they offer. So we were happy that we found a place that has many different, even though the slight majority are local kids, there's a lot of different nationalities and cultures and religion and languages at the school. That was important to us.
Thank you for bringing that up because that jogs my memory. We went to a school as our boys were going into middle school, and we talked to some staff and another parent, and we did not ask about the diversity of the student body. And it turned out to be really only local kids. And it was the teacher kids that were the international kids. And it turned out to be not a very good situation. So I'm glad you brought that up for people. And jumping back to our listing of criteria and questions that you can go to our website, we've got that long list. And I think that is one of the questions, the diversity of the student body, especially for your children. And then talking to teachers with children at the school and potentially just regular parents at that school to get more of a feel to see if it's going to be a good fit for your children.
Yeah, being able to speak with parents who are already there is important. And fortunately, we had a connection through a family that is at our current school. And the family we spoke with at the new school also has a child who needs some support. So that was great. That was a real blessing. So yeah, I'm very grateful. I'm a little nervous about India. I mean, after being in a really quiet, kind of isolated location, we're going to be in a big city. So there'll be a lot of traffic, but I'm really excited.
Well, we're excited for you and your ongoing adventure, and we'll catch up with you once you've had a chance to settle in and get the lay of the land, and maybe we'll have another conversation. So anything else you want to address before we sign off?
No, I'm just really grateful that you have this amazing initiative you guys are running with the website. And I've gleaned a lot by listening to the podcast with different, I guess, industry veterans and forward-thinking educators. So I think it's great what y'all are doing.
Thank you. So if our listeners go ahead and read your blog and listen to this interview, which hopefully they will, and maybe they want to know a little bit more about you and what you're about, how might they follow you or contact you?
So I'm on LinkedIn.
Yeah, LinkedIn. That's stuck in my head now too.
I don't spend much time on the other social media.
Mm-hmm. So just Claire Gaul.
Or I'm trying not to. Yeah, just Claire Gaul.
Okay.
I'm trying to cut down on social media habits.
I don't blame you.
But I'm happy. I would love to chat with anybody about international education. So I love to meet new people and hear about their experiences.
Same.
So, Claire, you made a reference back to the colors of our middle school at Riyadh. And just to refresh the listeners' memories, if they listened to the previous show, you were our student there in Riyadh, and your mom was a learning resource teacher, and I worked closely with her. That was a wonderful partnership. You bring such presence to our discussions. I know that you're a listener and you seek perspective, you seek understanding, and you're just a peaceable person. And I think it's been pretty neat how you and Jamel have worked your way through different schools, small schools, and now you're going to move maybe to a bigger school, definitely a bigger place. And Jamel's become a big name in the tech world with his diploma work and design. So he's got quite a following, and I'm hoping
He does, yeah.
He does, doesn't he? Oh my gosh.
I admire him. I didn't know. I mean, we've been working alongside each other now for a few years, but I really didn't understand what a powerhouse he is until I started working in secondary, because he's humble.
Yes.
He doesn't brag about what he does. He just gets down to it. And he brings an incredible work ethic to school. And he's a real powerhouse. And he's so good at what he does. I might be biased.
Well, he's definitely put a community together. So that's super cool too. Well, we are going to send you and your kiddies off with our best Educators Going Global wishes. And thank you again. And thank you again for writing the blog post.
Yes, thank you, Claire.
Thank you. It's good to see you guys.
Thank you for joining us today on Educators Going Global.
You can find this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, and all the other usual suspects.
Please subscribe, like us, and leave a review on Apple and Spotify. and let your teaching friends know about us so we can grow our community.
Please reach out at educatorsgoingglobal@gmail.com and join our Facebook group, Educators Going Global, if you have ideas, comments, or wish to share a Going Global story of your own.
You can also find us on Instagram at Educators Going Global.
Please visit our website as well, www.educatorsgoingglobal.com. All our podcast episodes are on there by topic, along with blog posts, Going Global stories, and our ever-growing resource library. For now, this is Audrey
And David.
inviting you to travel,
Teach.
and connect with us.